Third of the audience did keep track of that. Then do the best that you can to estimate. How many stood up at least 10 times? Raise your hand if you stood up, you think about 10 times or more. And how many stood up 10 times or fewer? Well, obviously everybody else by definition. Good question, Warren. How many people stood up at least 6 times? Okay, about 75% of the men and about 15% of the women. So we get, even in the context of this room, a great deal of the differences between men and women. When you're out in Middle America, where there's a greater percentage of people working in corporations and companies, you see a great deal of difference, particularly in the areas of the choices of fields. The choices of fields are the fields that earn the most are clearly engineering and computer sciences, and yet and women in those fields, in every single one of those fields, with just a couple of exceptions, in the subfields of engineering and the subfields of computer sciences, earn more than men do. So one of the things that I discovered, and even without the other things like greater commutes, doing work in the hazardous aspects of those fields, like people who are in hazardous fields are much, much more likely to be men. As you know, 93% of people who die at work are men. So if you have a technical field and a hazardous field, the chances of a man working in that are much greater. In each of these areas, there's a certain percentage increase that normally occurs if you increase your involvement in those fields. So for example, if a person puts in more hours per week, the average person who puts in more hours per week, if they put in 44 hours a week, what would be your guess as to how much more they make than a person putting in 34 hours a week? 44 versus 34. What would be your guess? 50% more, 10% more, 20% more? Anybody else? 50% more. It's close to 100% more. And the implications of that are enormous. The average male works 3 hours, the average full-time working male works 3 hours more per week than the average full-time working female. That alone accounts for 70% of the pay gap difference. But looked at in terms of opportunities for women and for men, if a person who works 44 hours a week makes almost twice as much as a person working 34 hours a week, not usually at the same job, of course, but a person working 44 hours a week usually is able to leverage that extra commitment into getting different types of jobs, working with different types of companies that want the person with greater amounts of flexibility. Look at what that implies for family decisions. A child is about ready to come into a family that doesn't have children, and we usually make a decision the woman usually makes one of 3 decisions. She either decides to work full-time, be full-time involved with the children, or do some combination of both. The man makes 3 decisions also. He decides to work full-time, or to work full-time, or to work full-time. And so they usually generate among those 3 options. And so the women who, but one option that's available when we know that you earn almost twice as much by working 44 versus 34 hours a week is that the woman who is career-oriented go out and be full-time involved with her career. If she has children, that her husband stay home, focus on his career, focus on the family, focus on moving with the woman's career, supporting the woman. But that means, of course, a tremendous difference in the way we socialize men and women. It means that when we socialize women who are interested in being high-powered women, that the woman might make the automatic assumption that she will marry a high-powered man. She can marry a high-powered man, and it can work out if she and he are not going to have any children. But if she's going to have children, and he's going to have children, then usually the combination of family and work does better. She ends up happier if she's with a man who is focused on raising those children rather than a nanny being the one that raises the children. The children grow up more effectively. Single fathers do a very good job raising children, and fathers who are stay-at-home dads do a very good job raising children. In both cases, the children turn out better than when the reverse is the case. And so on 26 different areas of measurement. So we have lots of options to run the world, our decision-making in the family differently. The most important single decision that one makes, aside from these 25 decisions, are actually not any one of these 25 decisions. The most important single career decision that I found is the choice of a spouse. In other words, if you want to figure out what you want to do with your life in terms of balancing career and family, the person you choose as your partner is the most important single decision you make in that regard. I'd be happy to sort of entertain more on that later, but I want to move on to some of the other things that are needed to be considered. So the focus of my research was looking at these 25 differences, looking at the discrimination that still remains against women in the workplace, looking at the discrimination that is never looked at that is against men in the workplace, looking at the power of women and men to attract money that is not workplace derived, such as what I call genetic celebrity power, the ability of a beautiful woman to attract income in a lot of different ways that is not available for most men in the world. And so those were some of the sort of foci of that. What got me into all of this research was when I was on the board of NOW in New York City. Which I was on for 3 years. I used to wear the 59-cent pin. Most of you are too young to remember what that 59-cent pin was about. But for those of us aged people, that was a pin we used to wear that suggested that men earned $1 for each 59 cents that women made in the workplace. And we all believed that the gap between that dollar and that 59 cents was discrimination against women. And I was one of the people who very strongly believed that and protested against that discrimination. But one day I sort of asked myself a question that sort of got me into the type of trouble that Larry Summers got into at Harvard. I asked myself this question. I said, if men got paid $1 for each 59 cents that women got paid for the same work, why would anybody hire a man? And then I pressed myself a little bit further on that issue, and I said, well, I'm just going to go out and form an all-female firm, because obviously then I can produce things for 59 cents that other firms have to sell for $1. But I figured that maybe somebody thought of that before me, and I started asking, maybe there's something else to the whole situation besides that, because clearly, as I thought more carefully about it, if a company did hire all men, and it cost them $1, and other companies hired all women and it cost them 59 cents to produce the same product, that capitalism has built into it a punishment for people who are stupid enough to discriminate. If you're stupid enough to discriminate and hire the man when the woman can produce the same product for about half that amount, you're going to be soon losing business. And the punishment will be being put out of business or going broke. And so that in a way the government wasn't necessarily needed, perhaps, I asked myself, to do what was already built into the structure of capitalism, which was to punish people who discriminated, who exercised that discrimination in terms of hiring people who were less productive for the same work and paying them more money. So I started thinking about that, and then I said, well, then maybe, if that's the case, there may be what other factors are involved that separate out men's work from women, the decisions that men make versus the decisions that women make, and could they account for the pay gap? So as I started looking at that and realizing that there's that men work 3 hours more than women and in the workplace, and I realized, and seeing that that accounted for 70% of the pay gap, I started looking at each of these other issues and seeing that even 10, 15 years ago, we had very interesting data about men and women that no one has ever heard of. So, for example, or very few people have ever heard of, one example was I started looking at the differences between never married women and never married men. It made sense to me that if it wasn't gender discrimination, that maybe never married men and never married women would earn more similar amounts to each other if it was about decisions around family that was creating differences in outcome. So I went back to Jesse Bernard's book, Future of Marriage, written 30-some-odd years ago, found in an appendix to that the fact that never married women earn more than never married men. Never married women 30 years ago earned more than never married men. So I was wondering if that still was the same. And then some of my feminist colleagues rightly and accurately said to me, Warren, the reason that never married women maybe do earn more than never married men is because, let's face it, never married women are winners and never married men are losers. And while losers and winners is a pretty tough way of putting it,